Hello everyone, and welcome to my Beyond the Gates official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. In the quiet gray morning that hung over Oak Ridge Cemetery like a veil of reluctant grief, the town gathered for Bill Carmichael's funeral, a man whose sudden passing had not only shaken the community, but torn open old wounds many hoped had been buried long ago. And as mourners slowly filled the rows of folding chairs arranged beneath a white canopy trembling in the cold wind, the atmosphere grew thick with whispers, sideways glances, and the uncomfortable tension that always arises when secrets and guilt mingle with sorrow. The first of the two unusual things occurred even before the service officially began, when a sleek black car that no one recognized rolled up to the cemetery gates, and out stepped a tall woman with short silver blonde hair, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, a woman who moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to commanding a room, and although no one seemed to know her name, older residents exchanged uneasy looks as if they recognized a ghost from decades earlier. Someone who should not have returned, someone whose history with Bill was dusted over and locked away in the past. She stood at the periphery, not taking a seat, clutching a single white gardenia, Bill's favorite flower, something only a handful of people knew, and whenever anyone tried to approach her, she offered a tight, polite smile that discouraged conversation as effectively as a closed door. The funeral director, uncomfortable but unwilling to confront a stranger clearly determined to be there, simply carried on preparing the podium, leaving the townspeople to speculate. Was she a former lover? A business rival? Someone connected to the old scandal involving Bill's construction company, an incident everyone had promised to forget? And yet, as curious as her arrival was, the second unusual thing, the one that belonged to Hayley, struck the heart of the crowd even more sharply because Hayley, who had been conspicuously absent since Bill's death and rumored to be consumed by guilt for reasons that no one had yet confirmed, emerged at the edge of the service wearing a faded denim jacket far too casual for a funeral, clutching not flowers, not a letter, not a keepsake, nothing that made any sense, but instead a sealed manila envelope that she held as though it might burn her fingers. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen, and though she seemed terrified to be there, she forced her way down the center aisle before the minister could begin the eulogy, earning startled gasps as she stepped directly beside the coffin. Her hands shook violently as she placed the envelope on top of the mahogany lid, and for a moment she simply stood frozen, her throat working as she tried to speak, the silence around her so deep and expectant that even the wind seemed to hold still. When she finally found her voice, it cracked on the first word, a raw whisper of apology so fragmented it barely carried past the front row, and she murmured something about a truth Bill never wanted revealed, a truth she could no longer carry by herself, insisting that everything inside the envelope belonged to the town, not to her, and that whatever judgment came afterward, she was ready for it, because she had loved Bill, even when she had failed him. The crowd murmured, shifting uneasily, and Sharon, Bill's longtime confidant and the unofficial guardian of every rumor in Oak Ridge, tried to stand and intervene, but Hayley stepped back quickly, shaking her head as if terrified someone would open the envelope before its time. The minister, thrown off script and clearly unprepared for this emotional disruption, hesitated before gently suggesting the service continue, but the uneasy tension lingered like a storm cloud, especially when the mysterious silver-haired woman's gaze snapped toward Hayley with such sharp recognition that it startled those around her. And then, another shock. The woman slipped a small metal key from her pocket, examining it with unmistakable worry, as though Hayley's envelope threatened to unlock something far more dangerous than grief. As the service proceeded, with readings of psalms and reminiscences of Bill's supposed kindness, the undertow of secrets, of unresolved conflicts, of things deliberately left unsaid, pulled tighter and tighter until the atmosphere felt ready to crack. Several people noticed the key, the way the woman kept rubbing her thumb over it, the way she watched the envelope as if it were a live bomb, and a few whispered theories. Was Bill involved in something criminal? Did he keep a secret safety deposit box? Was this woman the executor of something he never meant the town to uncover? Meanwhile, Hayley sat alone in the very back row, trembling, her eyes darting from the coffin to the envelope to the stranger, clearly aware that the storm she had set in motion could not be undone now. When the final blessing was given and the coffin prepared for lowering, the second unusual moment came to its peak. Hayley rose abruptly and attempted to leave, but the silver-haired woman intercepted her with frightening precision, blocking her path and speaking in a low, urgent tone that no one else could hear, though witnesses later said that Hayley's expression collapsed into horror at whatever had been said. The two women stared at each other, one stern, one terrified, as the coffin began its slow descent into the earth, and with it, the envelope, resting atop the lid, disappeared into the shadows of the grave, leaving everyone stunned. A panicked whisper rippled through the crowd. Had Hayley intended the town to read what was inside? Had the envelope been meant for someone else? Why would she allow it to be buried? Why hadn't she stopped the burial? Or why hadn't anyone? But Hayley, her voice hoarse and defeated, simply whispered, "He wanted the truth buried with him, and now it is, unless she decides otherwise," nodding toward the mysterious woman, whose expression revealed nothing except a calculation far too intricate and dangerous for a funeral setting. And as the first handfuls of dirt were thrown over the coffin, sealing both Bill and his secrets away, the stranger slipped the small key back into her pocket, turned without a word, and departed as silently as she had arrived, leaving a stunned, shaken community behind. In the days that followed, speculation ran wild about the envelope, the key, the stranger, and Hayley's tormented confession, but those at the funeral agreed on one thing: Bill Carmichael's burial was not an ending, but the opening salvo of a conflict that had been simmering for decades, and whatever Hayley knew, whatever she had tried to hide or reveal, would soon erupt into a new chapter of chaos in Beyond the Gates. In the tense and bewildering hours after Bill Carmichael's coffin was lowered into the ground, the town of Oak Ridge found itself in a state of hushed agitation, as though the funeral had cracked open a fault line beneath their feet, and by nightfall rumors moved with the velocity of wildfire. Hayley's trembling confession, the mysterious silver-haired woman, the envelope swallowed by the grave, the key gleaming in the stranger's palm, each detail distorted, exaggerated, or weaponized depending on who is doing the retelling. And while most residents locked their doors early, clutching their own secrets tighter than ever, a small, uneasy coalition formed almost organically around Sharon, Nicole, and Vernon at Sharon's dimly lit kitchen table, a place that had borne witness to more secrets than the police station, the church, and City Hall combined. Sharon, who had been visibly shaken during the funeral, now paced with restless fury, insisting that Hayley had done something irreversible, that Bill's legacy, whatever that meant, was now at the mercy of someone from his past that he had gone to great lengths to erase, and as she poured herself yet another glass of wine, Nicole tried to reason with her, reminding her that none of them knew what the envelope contained or why Hayley had chosen to bury it instead of exposing it publicly, but Sharon waved her off, muttering that Hayley's guilt-filled eyes said everything, and that no envelope filled with truth ever belonged in a grave. Meanwhile, Vernon, usually the calm voice of logic, sat stiffly at the table, staring at the flickering candle as though it held answers, confessing that he recognized the stranger, not by name, but by reputation, as someone tied to a business dispute from nearly 20 years ago, one that Bill had sworn was resolved, but Vernon had never fully believed him, not after the lost contracts, the sudden shift in his temperament, the late-night phone calls he refused to explain. And now, with this woman resurfacing at his funeral, the past was clearly unearthing itself, dragging every buried betrayal with it. Across town, Hayley had barricaded herself in her small apartment above the hardware store, pacing back and forth, replaying every second of the funeral, her hands still shaking as though the envelope had left a permanent tremor in her bones. She had expected backlash, anger, questions, maybe even pity, but she had not expected the silver-haired woman, nor the words she whispered that left Hayley unable to breathe. If you think burying that envelope protects you, or him, you're far more naive than he believed. Those words churned through her mind like poison, compounded by the truth she had desperately attempted to silence, a truth Bill had once sworn he would take to the grave, and now he had, only she wasn't sure if that was enough to stop what was coming. Outside her window, the town lay quiet, unaware that the envelope buried with Bill contained documents, signed contracts, secret financial transfers, and a confession handwritten in his unmistakable scrawl that detailed a scandal so far-reaching it could destroy not just reputations, but entire families whose histories were interlocked with Bill's mistakes. But Hayley, consumed by guilt and loyalty, had buried it anyway, hoping that honoring Bill's dying wish might at least delay the disaster. She collapsed onto her couch, pulling her knees to her chest, trembling as she replayed the night Bill revealed the truth to her. The night he admitted everything, begging her to keep it hidden even after he died, trusting her with the burden he had been too weak to carry alone. Meanwhile, the silver-haired woman, whose name the town would soon learn was Vivian Marquette, sat quietly in the back booth of the moonlit diner, sipping black coffee and examining the small metal key under the neon glow. She had not expected the envelope to be buried, but she was patient, calculating, aware that Oak Ridge Cemetery grounds were poorly monitored at night. She placed the key on the table beside her and retrieved her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she sent a message to someone saved under a cryptic alias. Hid more than I anticipated. Begin phase 2. And prepare for excavation. As the message sent, she leaned back with a thin, cold smile, knowing full well that the storm beginning to form above Oak Ridge was one she had engineered for years, long before Bill's death, long before Hayley's complicity, long before the town realized it was sitting on the edge of a reckoning that would spare no one. And while the citizens of Oak Ridge attempted to sleep, unaware of the shadows shifting toward their tidy little world, Vivian stepped out of the diner into the wind, her coat snapping behind her like a dark omen, as she whispered to herself, "The truth doesn't stay buried. Not when it's owed." That night, as the clock crept past midnight, and the wind howled across Oak Ridge like a warning the townspeople didn't yet know they needed to hear, Vivian Marquette moved with silent precision toward the cemetery, her boots leaving barely a trace on the damp ground as she approached Bill Carmichael's freshly covered grave, the dirt still loose and uneven from the afternoon burial. And though the thought of being seen might have frightened someone less determined, she possessed a chilling confidence. She belonged to the kind of past where digging up graves was nothing compared to the secrets they protected. A black SUV idled at the cemetery's edge, with its headlights off, two men inside, her associates, watching vigilantly as Vivian stepped into the beam of her small flashlight. She knelt in the mud, brushed her fingers over the mound of earth, and whispered, "You always thought you could outsmart me, Bill. Even in death you try." She signaled to the men, and within seconds they were out of the vehicle, retrieving shovels from the trunk. As the first shove of metal pierced the soil, the sound echoed through the quiet night like a heartbeat, slow and rhythmic, each thrust uncovering the grave Bill had begged to be left untouched. Meanwhile, across town, Hayley jolted awake from a restless sleep, soaked in sweat, convinced she had heard something. Bill's voice? A warning? A plea? And she stumbled into her kitchen, gripping the counter as fear clawed at her chest. She knew Vivian wasn't the type to let things end neatly. Burying the envelope may have protected Bill momentarily, but Vivian would not let secrets, especially ones that implicated her, stay underground. Hayley reached for her jacket, cursing herself, cursing Bill, cursing the moment she agreed to help him, but before she could leave, a violent pounding shook her door. She froze, breath caught in her throat, until she recognized the voice on the other side, Sharon, frantic and breathless, shouting, "Hayley, open up, now. Something's happened at the cemetery." Hayley's stomach turned to ice as she threw open the door, confronted with Sharon's pale, panic-stricken face illuminated by the hallway's flickering bulb. Sharon grabbed her wrist, practically dragging her into the stairwell as she hissed, "Vernon just called me. Someone's been seen at Bill's grave. We have to stop them before they find the envelope." But Hayley, trembling, shook her head violently and whispered, "We can't stop her, Sharon. You don't understand. Vivian has the key. She knows everything." Sharon narrowed her eyes, confused, angry, terrified all at once, demanding, "What key? What did you bury with him, Hayley?" But Hayley only whispered, "Everything he wanted hidden." Back at the cemetery, the men had already dug halfway down, their breaths forming clouds in the cold air, the metallic scent of soil hanging heavy around them, and Vivian watched with a chilling calmness, her hands clasped behind her back, as though she were inspecting a routine operation rather than a criminal desecration. By the time the shovels struck the coffin with a dull thud, the moon slipped behind a cloud, plunging them into a murky darkness that felt almost supernatural. Vivian lifted her flashlight again and gestured for the men to pry the coffin open. The hinges groaned, protesting, and for a moment, as the lid creaked upward, Vivian felt a rare shiver of apprehension. Bill had always been clever, and she half expected some kind of trick or warning left behind. But when the coffin opened, revealing his still, lifeless form, peaceful in the dim light, her eyes snapped immediately to the object resting against his folded hands, the manila envelope, exactly where Hayley had placed it, soil-speckled but intact. Vivian exhaled slowly, triumphantly, and reached inside. Yet the second her fingers brushed the envelope, something unexpected happened. A sudden chorus of footsteps, rapid and desperate, echoed across the cemetery grounds. Vivian's head shot up, her flashlight beams slicing through the darkness, just in time to catch Sharon and Hayley stumbling toward the grave, breathless and horrified. Sharon screamed, "Stop. Don't touch it," as Hayley froze at the edge of the excavation pit, her eyes widening in terror as she saw the coffin open and the envelope in Vivian's grip. And for the first time that night, Vivian smiled, cool, sharp, victorious, and purred. "Too late, Hayley. You buried the truth with him. I'm simply digging it back up." The men stepped forward to block Hayley and Sharon from getting any closer, and Vivian tore open the envelope with a swift motion, unraveling the first page under her flashlight. Her eyes scanned the handwriting, Bill's handwriting, her jaw tightening as she read the damning confession she had suspected existed, but hoped was a myth. Hayley felt her knees weaken, and Sharon, equally shaken, whispered, "What did Bill do?" Vivian closed the folder slowly, her expression darkening into something far more dangerous than anger. "It's not about what Bill did," she whispered coldly. "It's about what Bill hid, and who he hid it for." And as the clouds above burst open with a sudden cold rain, the three women stood at the edge of the open grave, the truth finally ripping itself free from the shadows, and Oak Ridge's long-buried nightmare truly began. The rain intensified so quickly that within seconds the cemetery was slick and glistening, droplets drumming on the coffin lid and sliding down the edges of the open grave as though the sky itself were recoiling from the secrets Vivian now held in her hands. And as she lifted the flashlight closer to the pages, her expression sharpened into a mixture of vindication and fury, two emotions that rarely coexisted in someone as calculating as her, while Hayley stood trembling at the edge of the pit. Soaked through, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Vivian, please don't do this." But Vivian didn't even look up, her eyes devouring Bill's confession like a predator assessing the damage its prey had caused. Sharon, who had always prided herself on composure even in the midst of scandal, could scarcely breathe, her mind spinning as she tried to read the shifting expressions on Vivian's face. Anger, disbelief, triumph, and something darker, something rooted in a past Oak Ridge had never been privy to. The two men who had helped dig the grave stood stiffly beside Vivian, awaiting orders, though even they seemed unsettled by the intensity radiating from her as she turned the next page, her breathing growing sharper with each handwritten line. When she finally snapped the folder shut, her shoulders rose and fell with a long, deliberate inhale, and she spoke with the icy detachment of someone who had already planned her next 10 moves. "Bill didn't just betray me. He betrayed this entire town." Hayley flinched at the words, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, her guilt pouring out of her in choked whispers. "He wanted to fix it, he wanted to come clean." But Vivian cut her off with a single raised hand. "Don't insult me," she said, her voice soft but lethal. "Bill spent decades laundering money through fake land acquisitions. He used shell companies to buy property that didn't exist. He implicated people without their knowledge. And the biggest laugh. He made sure the blame would fall on someone else if the truth ever came out. Sharon's jaw dropped as she stumbled back a step, gripping Hayley's arm to steady herself. Someone else?
Who?
Vivian's cold gaze flicked from Hayley to Sharon, settling on them with a chilling sense of certainty. You, Sharon, she said, her voice slicing through the rain-soaked air like a knife. The accusation hit Sharon so hard she let out a sound halfway between a gasp and a cry, her hand flying to her mouth as she whispered, No, no, that's impossible. I had nothing to do with his business deals. I barely understood half the things he did. But Vivian was already stepping up out of the grave, envelope in hand, gesturing for her associates to close the coffin. Bill forged your signature. Multiple times. On documents worth millions. Enough that when the authorities find this, she raised the folder slightly. You will be the prime suspect in a conspiracy that lasted nearly 20 years. Sharon felt the world tilt beneath her, her legs nearly buckling as the weight of Vivian's accusation pressed down on her like a physical force, and Hayley, distraught and barely standing, grabbed Sharon's shoulders and shook her head violently, crying, No, she's lying. Bill would never do that to you. Vivian only tilted her head and smirked, rain dripping off her hair as she replied, You really didn't know him at all, did you? The words hung there, cold and devastating, while the two men finished sealing the coffin and began shoveling dirt back into the grave, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Sharon's voice cracked as she whispered, Why? Why would Bill do that to me? What did I ever do to him? And for the first time since the opening of the grave, Vivian's expression softened, not with sympathy, but with the bitter satisfaction of someone who has been waiting years to speak the truth. Because, she said, stepping dangerously close to Sharon, her breath mixing with a storm-chilled air, you were the one person he trusted too much. The one person he knew would never suspect him. The perfect cover. Sharon's knees finally buckled, and Hayley caught her before she hit the ground, both of them crying, shaking, soaked to the bone, the realization sinking in that Bill, kind, generous, loyal Bill, had built an empire of lies on the back of the people he claimed to care about most. But just as Vivian turned to leave, as though she had delivered her final blow and the rest of Oak Ridge could now tear itself apart without her assistance, the distant wail of police sirens pierced the storm, growing louder and closer with each passing second. Vivian didn't flinch. She simply handed the envelope back to one of her men, murmuring, Plan B, before slipping into the night like a shadow that had never been there at all. The rain continued to lash down on the cemetery as the flashing red and blue lights approached, illuminating the horror of the open grave, the overturned soil, and the two devastated women standing on the brink of a secret that was about to engulf the entire town of Oak Ridge in a scandal bigger than anything it had survived before, or perhaps bigger than anything it deserved to survive.